Cyber Insiders, untold stories from behind the cyber frontline.
Hi, and welcome to Cyber Insiders, the podcast where we look at what it's really like to be on the front line of cybersecurity. I'm Dominic Adams, your podcast host and communications lead at Adarma, one of the UK's leading managed security service providers. And today I'm going to be talking to Leanne Salisbury, a principal consultant here at Adarma, about how thinking like an attacker can help organizations strengthen their cybersecurity posture. Leanne's going to share with us why creative cybersecurity testing isn't just technical, it's a business exercise. By the end of this episode, you'll know how to design creative testing scenarios using what you know about your business, how to turn testing compliance into meaningful exercise with actionable outcomes, and how to gain greater insights into potential blind spots to support decision making. So, without further ado, hi Leanne, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi Dom, thank you.
So, for our listeners, can you give us just a brief overview of what creative testing is?
So creative testing is a way of approaching any kind of testing scenario development. So from red teaming to crisis simulation tabletop exercises. And the idea really is to push boundaries in terms of the art of the possible and to create scenarios which will test the organisation in novel ways.
So when organizations create new scenarios for testing their security posture, where do they usually go wrong? What are the blind spots that they typically miss?
Well, testing can often be seen as a compliance exercise or just kind of tick boxing to satisfy internal audit or the regulator. So there can be a bias towards testing as a way to validate what is already known, rather than testing and using it as an opportunity to find out where there are weaknesses and which areas need to be improved. To get the most from testing, scenarios should be mapped to the business, what would impact critical functions and their underpinning systems that they rely on in order to operate. So it's important to understand what you need to protect to start with. It's not just a technical exercise, it's a business exercise. Think about the organisation and what it does to create revenue. For example, a retail bank, that could be online banking, ATMs, Swift. For a luxury goods manufacturer, that could be clothing line production, design IP, high street point of sale machines. It's important also to look at the worst case scenario. So what would hurt them most if an attacker impacted one of your important business services or critical functions? Are you reliant on the availability of underpinning systems supporting ATMs? Is it confidentiality or integrity of design IP? And once you have the scenario anchored to those potential business impacts, you can then develop testing in a way which gives more value to the organisation and can help to gain senior stakeholder buy-in for any investment you might need to improve security.
So we hear people talk a lot about thinking like the attacker, taking a threat-led approach. I mean, what does that really involve? And how does it help build a more effective scenario creation?
Well, thinking like an attacker is often how we approach threat-led red team testing, but it can be applied across other types of scenario development, from tabletop exercises into threat modelling. It's a way of thinking like the human behind the attack, not just focusing on the technical. Remember always that the threat actors are not abstract concepts. They are people. There are people behind the keys. Attackers, they typically have an objective. They want to exfiltrate funds, they want to steal information, disrupt, make a political point, or hold the organisation to ransom. When red teams conduct tests, they tend to focus on the scenario as the objective. So when red teams conduct tests, they focus on the scenario objective, which is directly linked to impacting specific business functions in a way that will impact the organisation the most. They move through the system in any way they can, really, through the easiest routes based on their capability, much like an attacker would. You can use the same approach when developing tabletop exercises and for threat modelling and use case development.
So when organizations, how do they, when it comes to this, how do they reframe, rethink the purpose of testing scenarios? How do we change that mindset? I mean, in essence, what is the benefit of using creative testing scenarios over, say, common testing scenarios? I think you kind of lightly touched on that. But could you expand a bit on it for me?
Yeah, sure. So creative testing uses scenarios which may be unlikely but impactful. In red teaming, this is often referred to as wildcard scenarios. I've worked with threat-led red teaming exercises in the past where the regulator regulator involved has required a wildcard scenario to be added to the testing plan. And the reason behind that is because it pushes the organisation to really test themselves and really challenge themselves. The benefit of testing these wildcards, unlikely but impactful scenarios, allows for a more creative approach and moves the teams away from testing the common scenarios that they were already prepared for. This is because testing common scenarios, which are well understood and defended against, can lead to false sense of security and overconfidence in the security posture. So when looking to apply this to crisis simulation exercises, adding novel elements as a scenario builds will help to stress test your team and challenge the mindsets, challenge that kind of fixed mindset. If your team think they know every way the organisation might be attacked, they will likely think that they are also well prepared for every eventuality. Challenging this thinking enables the team to work through unlikely but plausible scenarios where they may not feel as confident about how they would respond.
So, how might a creative scenario testing, how could it benefit organizations with operational technology?
Organizations who are concerned about their OT environments can really benefit from this creative scenario development as a way of working through potential attacks without the need for technical testing and the associated risks of disrupting the availability. So considering potential threat actor groups, their capability, mapping out the scenarios, these organisations can work through hybrid attacks, those combining both the technical and the physical elements. It enables them to work through scenarios where an attack would have been a significant real-world impact, which could potentially include a loss of life or risk to life. And so they can understand where they might have gaps in security, but without taking the risk of live testing.
So for organizations, how do they identify which threat actors are the most relevant to them specifically?
Well, initially, it's good to look at who's out there. So which threat actor groups are motivated to target your sector, the type of organisation, along with who may have the capability to conduct an attack. Think in terms of your critical functions or important business services. What is it you're trying to protect and in what way? Is it availability, integrity of the data? Which groups have the capability and potential motivation to conduct those kinds of attack? And so taking that, think about the motivations as well, at kind of the political level. Perhaps the group are not motivated to target luxury manufacturers generally, but they are motivated to target British luxury manufacturers, or they are specifically looking to target UK CNI, such as healthcare providers or financial services in the UK. Think about your organisation specifically as well. So is there a reason an insider might be motivated to act in a malicious way? Or has the organisation raised its profile in the media in a way which could incite a response from a particular kind of politically motivated group? I think the key really is to remember to think outside the box. Whilst motivation is a key aspect to predict adversary behaviour, remember that opportunity can motivate those who may not have ordinarily targeted your organisation. So thinking about kind of data leaks, exposed vulnerabilities, which can be sold on the dark web to the highest bidder. Also consider various kind of criminal ecosystems which exist today, access brokers, ransomware as a service, and also the use of new technologies like AI and large language models. Capability can be bought to an extent, so the bar has been lowered in terms of expertise that are needed. However, you could do away with motivation completely. The key really is to test the organisation and push boundaries. So you're not limiting yourself to the potential value of scenario testing.
So what I'm getting kind of implied from some of the stuff you've said, it's important to have these wild card situations, but I'm getting the impression that there's a bit of hesitance or almost reluctance to kind of invest time in finance investment in that. And so how do we break that it hasn't happened mindset?
I think it's really important not to limit thinking based on what's already happened. Just because it hasn't happened before doesn't mean it won't. There's always a first time, so we need to prepare ourselves and keep ahead of evolving threats. Security is a moving target. Tracking as mature and having dashboards kind of showing green is great, but we need to make sure we're not assessing ourselves against a dated view of the threat landscape.
So, how do we ensure that creative thinking, it's great You've listed the benefits. That's brilliant. And what we really need to know now is, how does this creative testing lead to practical change? Like, what's the next step in that journey?
It's important to take action to close the gaps and address any weaknesses that have been identified through that creative testing. They may only be hypothetical scenarios, but if they are plausible and they could cause an impact to the business, they need to be addressed. So make a clear plan for improvements, who in the business needs to act, and map out a roadmap to implement those improvements. The benefit of the approach, which maps against critical functions, as I talked about at the start, for their business, means that senior leaders can clearly understand the link between the potential business impact and the investment that they may need to make to mitigate the risk. Creative testing scenarios can also form use cases which could be added to your SIEM platform for the SecOps team to monitor, or you could ask your threat intelligence team to do some further research about those particular threats and support kind of ongoing analysis of that evolving threat that you're concerned about. And finally, a major benefit of this approach is to challenge comfort levels. So get your team testing their thinking about the threats to the organisation, focus on business impact, and reinforces the messages that in security we can never stand still.
So for my final question, like, this has all been really informative, but I want to throw one at you because we've been talking about them so much. So this is a wild card question that I know you're not prepared for, but can you tell me like an example of where a creative testing scenario would have been perfect? Like, is there an incident where something happened that was so unexpected that only a creative testing scenario could have possibly predicted that it would happen?
Yeah, so a really famous example would be the Las Vegas fish tank attack, which is one I would guess no one could have predicted if they had been thinking in kind of the traditional ways and focusing on the kind of usual routes of intrusion. This one was where the fish tank at a casino, which was equipped with sensors which had to regulate kind of the temperature for the fish, etc., was used as an entry point into the casino's network, and hackers used this to transfer lots of data, including high roller customers, out to a device in Finland. And it's this kind of unlikely but highly impactful, maybe slightly embarrassing scenario, and thinking through these kinds of new and novel ways to conduct attacks that can help organisations to really test themselves in more creative ways.
I don't think I've ever heard of anyone getting hacked through a fish tank before. I'm definitely going to go look that up. So thank you for joining me today. It's been really informative. I feel like I've learned a lot more about creative testing scenarios as a result of this. So thank you for joining me today. For our listeners, we hope you found this really enjoyable, you found it helpful. And of course, if this has raised anything you wish to discuss further, if you'd like to learn more about creative testing scenarios, then please don't hesitate to reach out to us at hello@adarma.com or visit us at www.adarma.com. So until next time, you all stay safe out there.
Cyber Insiders from Adarma. Follow and rate on your podcast app. Together, we've got this.